So, inshallah today I'm going to be talking about relationships in Islam, and specifically I'm focusing on the marriage relationship. And this is obviously a really broad topic, and it's not something that I can cover all aspects of in one sitting, but I'm going to focus more in particular on the concept of akhlaq in marriage and small things that we can do in our marriage to help improve the health of our relationships. And this is something that I'm a big believer in, that's really important for us to discuss in our community. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that marriage is half our deen, so it is a very important union in Islam as part of our religion. And yet, it's not something that I feel that as a community we discuss enough and talk about the issues and the struggles that come up in the marriages. My favourite verse in the Quran in relation to the relationship between a husband and wife is in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 187. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "They, your wives, are your garment, and you are a garment for them." And in this verse, I think it is such a simple verse and such a simple metaphor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives. But reflecting on it, there is such depth in meaning when we think about that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likens the relationship between a husband and a wife to a garment, so to our clothing. And when I think about this and I reflect on what's the nature of our clothing, because often we take our clothing for granted, and yet we are the only creatures that differ from the other creation, where we have to clothe ourselves. We're not born with protective outer layers like other animals and other creatures. We actually have to, it's a characteristic that's unique to us, that we need to clothe ourselves. And when we think about clothing, it's the closest thing to our skin. There's nothing closer to our skin than our clothing. And when we reflect on the function of our clothing, it's to protect us, it's to make us comfortable, it's to give us modesty. And it's often that when we're wearing something that hopefully it's something that we feel comforted in, but it also protects us from the elements of the harsh environments of the world outside. And so we think about this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has likened the relationship to our clothing. It's having that meaning that this relationship, this intimate relationship, which differs to every other relationship that we have in our lives, that intimate relationship between the husband and the wife. It has that quality of that closeness to us, and it should be ideally a relationship that protects us, that makes us feel safe, and guards us and protects us from the harsh environments that we face in this world. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Ar-Rum, verse 21 says, "And of his signs he created of you from yourselves mates, that you may find tranquility in them. And he placed between you affection and mercy. Indeed, in that are signs for people who give thought." So again, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using words such as that there is tranquility in this relationship, that is indicating that it's kind of like a sanctuary, that there's affection, which we all have a human need for connection and affection, and that there's mercy there. There's kindness and compassion in that relationship. And this elevates this beautiful connection between husband and wife, that this is the blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us in marriage. And so I reflect on the beauty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned. This is the relationship. This is the beautiful qualities that He's put between husband and wife. And yet, when we reflect upon some of the difficulties that people face in our community, I know that working in the area of mental health, I see a lot of the really awful side of what can happen in marriages. And yet you don't need to work in the community to know that there are lots of issues that go on behind closed doors in our communities that often are not spoken about, that remain unsaid. And so we're not going to sit here and pretend that there are not a lot of really serious issues in the marriages in our community. And this is something that we all have a responsibility to talk about. Because when we don't collectively as a community talk about some of the issues and that are going on and some of the really serious problems that people are facing in their marriages, then we're not able to equip our community with tools to be able to deal with them. And so this is my talk tonight. I'm going to talk about some of the things that we can start to reflect upon and address to try and improve the health of our relationships. Because although we're going to be realistic about some of the issues that are there in our community within marriages, I'm also a big believer in being very optimistic and having hope and looking towards ways that we can improve this really fundamental and important connection between husband and wife. Because realistically, if a man and a woman don't have a good marriage, they don't have a good connection, and there's negativity or there's toxicity in the home, then that has a flow-on effect to the children that may be in that family. It has a flow-on effect to the husband and wife being able to achieve their full capacity in integrating and working in the community. And so it affects all of us. So for us to be thinking about talking about the health of relationships, whether we're married or not, is something which we all have a vested interest in, because it's what helps to stabilise our community. So when I think about Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu and that he was sent to the Arabs and subhanAllah, the time of ignorance, the time of Jahiliyyah, where women didn't have any rights, where the brutality that was there, that there was no overarching system to protect people. And I reflect upon within a couple of decades how that entire, all those tribes of people were changed in their behaviour, changed in their view of women, changed in their view of marriage, because of the knowledge that came to them. And so this is the key for our community, that when we are equipping ourselves with knowledge, this is what will lead and affect significant social change. So I'm a big believer in being optimistic, but at the same time coming back to we need to keep coming back to the knowledge of our deen. So whilst it's lovely, I believe, to talk about some of the beautiful qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when a marriage is blessed and there's that close connection between a husband and wife, I think it's lovely to reflect on that aspect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also sent down and outlined boundaries within the marriage relationship. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 228, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and they, women, have rights over their husbands, similar to those of their husbands over them. But the men have a degree of responsibility over them. So, whilst the connection and that there should be that love and the mercy between a husband and wife in a marriage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also made very clear that there are boundaries of that relationship, that each of those parties has God-given rights that He has set down for them. And this is really important because it makes clear for both parties in that marriage that there is to be no oppression in that relationship, that marriage is not meant to be an oppressive institution for either party. And that making clear that the women have rights over their husbands. They have a right for good treatment. They have a right to be safe in that relationship. They have a right to be maintained. They have a right to be nurtured and supported and cared for. And also mentioning that men have rights over their wives as well. And I'm not going to go and go through in depth the rights and the responsibilities. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they are similar, meaning that there is a similar level of protection that they have to ensure that they are both safe and fulfilled in that marriage. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions that there is a degree of responsibility that the man has. Because we know that in Islam, that the role of the man is clearly to be the protector and the maintainer of his family. So he has a degree of added responsibility that he carries to maintain and protect his family. But I think it's really important that you know, as a community, that we make sure that we are well educating ourselves. What are our rights and what are our responsibilities? Because otherwise, what we're resting on is either assumptions that we come with our own perspectives, cultural baggage. We're not actually grounded in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made clear for us. And I also think it's really key that we know our rights, because sometimes when people come from backgrounds and experiences where they've had messages that they're not deserving, you know, if they're coming from places of having low self-esteem, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending the message of, no, you are deserving. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made clear, that you have rights within that relationship to ensure that you're not pushed into something that's forbidden, and to make sure that you're right, you're not pushed into something that's going to overtake those rights. But at the same time, we have that balance, that we also have responsibilities, and that we're also going to be asked about our role in the relationship and what we bring to the relationship. And that's mainly what I'm going to focus on today. So before I go in and talk about the actual the qualities and what can help to nurture and to grow a good relationship, one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that ideally before marriage, before we enter into that marriage contract, that we're selecting someone with both religion and good character. And both of these, as the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, are essential for a healthy marriage, that both people come in with having the two sides of their deen, of having religion and good character. And this is really essential, because having one without the other often is a root cause of a lot of problems. So if a person in a relationship has got deen, but they don't have good character, then this is going to be the cause of lots of problems in that relationship. And vice versa, if a person has really good character but they don't have religion, it's also going to be the result of a lot of problems. And this is important for us to remind ourselves, and particularly for those who are not married, or for parents who are thinking about marriage for their children, because it's easy in our community, sometimes we focus on the wrong things. Sometimes we're focusing on, we're fixated on things like social status, or income, or level of education, or even nationality or tribe that a person belongs to. And we forget that the Prophet ﷺ has made clear that the marriage that is blessed is when a person comes in with these two qualities. And also making clear for the people who are still looking to get married, the importance of seeking Allah's guidance before entering into marriage. We have a lot of issues in our community with people of all ages that are wanting to get married and finding it really difficult to meet potential spouses. And sometimes what can happen is when they've met someone who seems to tick a lot of boxes, and you know, they're at a point in their life where they really want to get married, sometimes people will overlook certain red flags that are there. And this is why Allah has given us the blessing of istikhara, to turn back to Him before making that final decision, to seek His guidance and to trust in that. Because sometimes a person can get the advice of, you know what, you're not going to find any better, you might as well just marry this person. And sometimes that can be a really big disaster. And I've seen cases where I've seen sisters who have had a bad gut feeling about a person, and they've talked themselves around, and they've gone forward, and they've married that person. And it's turned out to be a pretty shocking situation. I don't ever get 100% guarantee. But sometimes I think that it's just as important for us to remember that not to compromise, and to trust that Allah is Ar-Razak, He is the provider, and marriage is part of His provision. And so for those who have not yet married, to make sure that they're making istikhara before they move forward. And sometimes it takes courage to actually walk away, to decide, you know what, I'm not going to go through with this because my gut feeling is there's something that doesn't sit well with me. Even though everything I'm saying is ticking all the boxes, there's something that doesn't sit well within me. And when we're coming back to the rights and responsibilities, when we're entering into marriage, or we've got children that are entering into marriage, making sure that there's a really solid grounding in the rights and responsibilities of marriage. Because sometimes when people are getting married, sometimes the thing that is the most concerning is planning the wedding and getting a house ready and being fixated on these aspects. And I found this really concerning when we have lots of our young people entering into marriage and don't have a really sound foundation in their rights and their responsibilities. Because then what this young couple is going to be relying on is, again, whatever prior knowledge that they may have gained along the way, which may not be sound and complete, and they may then be coming in viewing marriage through the lens of cultural expectations or just their own perspectives. And Islam is all about prevention before cure. And so if we're making sure our young people, when they're going into marriage, that they've got a really solid grounding in their rights and responsibilities, it's going to equip them so much better to be able to prevent problems before they arise. And the last thing that I'm going to mention about before actually entering into marriage, just a quick note on also the concept of a marriage contract, that a lot of people, again, are not necessarily aware of, that part of marriage in Islam is actually having a written contract. And sometimes when we talk about this among young sisters, and they say, oh, that's not very romantic, having a contract. But it's actually really important, and it starts the marriage off in a way that issues are being discussed from the outset, and talking about some of the things that are important to both of you, that you can both say, you know what, we're going to agree to this and put that in the contract. So to ensure that there's that, there's as much understanding as possible of what they're both expecting from that marriage. So sometimes sisters might want to make clear that they want to be able to continue to study or to work, or some sisters want to make clear that they don't want to work. Or that they want to specify that they want to live in a particular region. There's things that people put in conditions around if divorce comes up, and it's basically meant to protect both parties. And there's lots of templates online that people can access. And again, when we're thinking about prevention before cure, it is a really important aspect of our religion that's often overlooked when people are seeking to get married. Now, although we have outlined that, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down very clearly that there are rights and responsibilities within a marriage, the view that as a community and as that we should be looking at marriage is ultimately really looking at it as teamwork, that it is a relationship to support one another and to help us to become, you know, better in ourselves, better in our practices, improving our faith, and that marriage is there that we are to help one another. And this was the example of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he had that concept of teamwork, and that this is what was demonstrated in his sunnah. Aisha radiallahu anha was asked what the Prophet ﷺ used to do at home, and she replied, he used to serve his household, but when it was a time for prayer, he would get up for the prayer. So when the Prophet ﷺ was at home, he was seeing himself as an active participant in that family. So he was doing household chores. He was, you know, milking the animals and assisting with sewing. He was active in that household and helping. And when I think of this, I think, subhanAllah, that he was, you know, he was teaching the community. He was receiving revelation. He was going on expeditions. He was involved in, you know, fighting battles, and yet he made the time when he came home to be there to help his family and be there for practical support. And at the same time, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ also used to support him. So they were there to support him in his mission. They were there that he consulted with them. So they were there to assist him to talk through difficulties that he was facing. That they went out on expeditions with him. So, and they were having to support him and be patient through the tests and trials that they went through. So when we look at his example, it was one where there's that mutual support. And at the same time that he was having to have so many roles and so many responsibilities, he was not neglecting to spend quality time with his wives, to be tuning into them, to be connecting with them. So this is a fundamental function of marriage, that support ideally goes both ways. The Prophet ﷺ has said that the most complete of the believers in faith is the one with the best character, and the best of you are those who are best to their women. So the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned that the connection between our faith and our character, that the two go hand in hand. And in another hadith he said, I have been sent to perfect character, to perfect good manners, to perfect good behaviour. And so what this shows us is that in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that our faith is connected with how we treat people around us. And particularly the Prophet ﷺ mentions within marriage. And how often as a community, when we're thinking about someone who has deen, and often we think about the outward acts of ibadah, which of course are absolutely important, we're absolutely fundamental to our religion. I don't want anyone to give the impression that they're not. So things like the prayer, the fasting, the charity, the hajj, we focus on how much Quran people know, how active they are in the community, and yet the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned over and over again in his hadith that the best of you are those who are best to your women. So elevating not just the person's character as a Muslim generally, but particularly within the marriage. And he's also said that the best among you is the best towards his wife, and I am the best towards my wife. So alhamdulillah that we have a beautiful example in the Prophet ﷺ of how he was towards his wives and in his marriages. So when we're thinking about then the importance of our character, and thinking about entering into marriage and ideally the beauty that should be present in a marriage and the blessings that should come from a marriage, that understanding that these things are not going to happen simply by signing a marriage contract, that marriage is naturally going to involve many, many tests and trials and difficulties, and it's going to be a test of our character. And that part of marriage is for us to self-reflect and it highlight the issues that we have in our character, and that hopefully, ideally, that through the marriage that we can seek to make changes and to improve and address the issues that we have within our character. And thinking about the concept of marriage is that it's something that requires a lot of work and requires a lot of effort. And one of the analogies that I believe is relevant is thinking about the marriage like a garden. If we want to have a flourishing, beautiful garden, it requires a lot of effort, it requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of energy to put into that garden in order to reap the fruits of it, and it takes time. And this is the perspective that we need to be taking with our relationships and with our marriage, that it's going to take a lot of effort from both sides. And it takes a lot of patience, and it's going to test us, and a lot of times we're not going to feel like we have the energy to put into that relationship. But ideally, that effort will eventually reap rewards. So one of the things to think about when we're when we're thinking about marriage and the concept of good character, we're often very conscious to display good character when we're dealing with people in the public space, when we're dealing with our friends, our colleagues, and even extended family members. So often we will show that level of good character to those people around us. So when we greet them with a smile and with warmth and affection, and we see how they're going, ask what's been happening, and really kind of show them that we care about them and demonstrate that in our behaviour. And yet, unfortunately, sometimes what's happening behind closed doors is a totally different matter. And that's something that, as a community, when we're thinking about the Prophet ﷺ was the best towards his wives, thinking about how are we towards our spouses. And one of the things that I think is often assumed in marriages, that over time, you just get used to your partner and they get used to you, and you just kind of don't worry about them so much, and you can just relax, and often what happens is that the effort goes down, and you can often take each other for granted. And when we're thinking about how we treat one another on a daily basis is absolutely fundamental, because a really strong relationship is actually not, it doesn't actually come from sort of one-off big events. So like buying a person a big gift, you know, a new car or a holiday somewhere. That relationships that are really connected and really thriving are actually built from the smallest of actions that occur on a daily basis. And it's how we treat one another on that day-to-day basis that actually can contribute massively over time to the health of that relationship. And so this is an opportunity for us to reflect on this and check ourselves. How do I greet my spouse when I see them first thing in the morning? How do I talk to them on the phone? How do I greet them at the end of the day? How do I convey to them, you know, greeting them with a smile that I'm pleased to see them, that and have that same standard of behaviour that I'd have with other people that would come into my home. And this is not a small thing, because it makes a big difference when the person that we're married to greets us with a smile and seems really pleased to see us. It makes a difference when that person says, you know, I really appreciate what you did today, thank you. Or is there just to tune in and just say, hey, how are you going? You know, is there anything I can do for you? And on the flip side, where those things are missing, over time, where there is a lack of good character in the marriage, that can also result in cracks over time. And often this is something that people will talk about in marriages, where over time that they've become, as we all do, we've all got, you know, a lot of pressures on, that where there's, you know, work pressures, study, children, and other competing things. It's really easy just to be focused on these things and not give the time or energy to our spouses. It's you know, it's not uncommon people to come home and you know, there are people on their phones or on their devices, and no one's really interacting with one another. And over time, this can really erode that connection in the relationship. And when we looked again back to the example of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that we see a similar thing, that it was the small gestures that he did with his wives that come out through the hadith. The small gestures of affection and care that he would demonstrate. And one way to think about it, that on a daily basis, it's kind of like when we're making small and consistent deposits into a bank account, that over time that accumulate. So those small acts of words of affection or gestures of kindness slowly over time accumulate to build a closer connection. When we're thinking about the times that we're going to be tested in marriage, and we're all tested in our relationships, part of that is also recognising the baggage that we all bring into our relationships. And this is from both sides, and this is without exception. Everyone has emotional baggage that they bring into their relationships based on either it's from their experiences growing up, or their you know, the difficulties that they've faced in their life, the environment that they've been in, cultural baggage, poor role modelling. So these are the things that all of us bring into our relationships. And it is essential that we have the ability to self-reflect and know what are our emotional baggage that we're bringing into that relationship, and what are the situations, what happens when that gets activated and when that gets triggered. And in order for a marriage to be healthy, it's also important that we recognise and take responsibility for our own emotional difficulties, because they're going to get triggered within the relationship. And when both sides are coming with their own prior baggage and things get triggered, then this is where problems can really escalate very, very quickly. And so one of the things that when we're under a great deal of stress, that often gets activated in relationships, particularly when there's when that relationship hits a difficult period or there's other external stresses going on, is that what often then gets triggered for people is the anger. And I'm sure that in any relationship that our spouses frustrate us, and there's times when we become infuriated by different issues and we infuriate each other. And this can be from all sorts of stresses outside of the marriage and within the marriage. And when we're looking at our community more broadly, and just from the from anecdotal evidence and my experiences working in the community over the last 20 years, we have a lot of issues of anger within our households. And this is not unique to the Muslim community that we have. We know the rates of domestic violence in Australia are exceptionally high. There are issues of anger that we have broadly as a community. And when we look at how when that gets activated within a household, and what happens when people become very angry and they're not managing that anger in healthy ways, that this is when relationships and when family environments can become incredibly toxic. And this is when it can descend into even physical or verbal abuse and violence. So part of, when we're thinking about how to improve a marriage, it's going to go hand in hand with how we are going to manage our own selves and how we deal with our emotions. Because many people are raised in environments where they haven't been taught how to deal with emotions in functional ways, where there's been modelled situations where either emotions are bottled up over time, which is incredibly unhealthy, or they're released in really explosive, toxic ways. And neither of these are healthy for a good marriage. It's normal for us to have emotions. You know, we all experience anger sometimes. We all go through periods which we experience very strong emotional experiences. And part of being able to have a healthy marriage is being able for us to regulate our own emotions and understand where some of these issues are coming from. And part of that might be that we recognise that a need for getting professional help to work through with a psychologist to be able to address some of these issues, but also recognising how we deal with our partners when they get triggered or when we get triggered. Because even within really good, healthy relationships, conflict can escalate incredibly quickly, and it doesn't take much for a situation between husband and wife to turn ugly very, very quickly. It doesn't take much for just one person to be triggered and for there to be an insult to be thrown, and for emotions to rise, for it to turn into making threats, for that interaction to become very toxic. And we need to understand that when these sort of situations, we're all responsible for managing our emotional responses. And a common thing of what I hear, and sometimes from both men and women, is they'll say, well, what did they expect? They're going to push my buttons, or they're going to keep pushing me to the edge. Of course I'm going to react like that. Of course I'm going to blow up. And this is really trying to, in other words, saying that it's the other person's fault for how I'm reacting. And really we've all got options of how we manage our emotions. There's always other options than attacking the other person or becoming abusive. And we always have the options to recognise when things are starting to become heated, and to say, you know what, we need to cut this conversation and we need to walk away for now. We need to come back and talk about this when we're both calmer. One of the Sahaba, Abu Darda, said to his wife, if you see me angry, calm me down, and if I see you angry, I will calm you down. Otherwise, it will be too difficult to live with one another. I think, mashallah, how beautiful, can really erode the love and connection in the marriage. And that this Sahaba was saying, let's work together on this, let's help each other. And this is not to say that we put responsibility for managing our anger with somebody else. because we ultimately have to be responsible for our own emotional reactions. But having this conversation with one another, let's help each other in this. You know, if we start to get angry and things start to get heated, let's help to calm one another down. Let's remind each other. Let's just call time on this. Take some time to calm down, and then we'll come back and talk about it when we're calmer. And this is really really essential, because what happens physiologically when we get really angry, when our anger reaches a certain point, what actually happens is we get flooded with stress hormones in our brain, and our frontal lobe essentially shuts down. And the frontal lobe of our brain is where we make good decisions. It's where we can think rationally, we can make good choices. So when our anger gets to a certain point of intensity and the frontal lobe shuts down, we're not very good at making good choices, and we're not good at talking through things logically. So if we are able to recognise that part of Islam is about personal development and being able to self-reflect and be able to have ways to work through our emotions, and again, whether that's just through our own research and work that we do on ourselves, or gaining professional help. Because part of that process is be able to attune to ourselves when our level of emotional intensity is escalating, where we need to say, I need to take some time out and calm down. Because by the time it intensifies to the point that we can no longer think straight, it's really too late for us to remove ourselves. We need to be much more tuned in a lot earlier on as that anger is rising. And this is really key, because one of the biggest predictors of divorce among couples is when conflict becomes really toxic. So when there's conflict and things are becoming abusive, so people become verbally abusive, so name calling, making threats, throwing insults, insulting family members, or worse, where there's physical violence and intimidation. Where these things are present in a marriage, where conflict turns into being verbally or physically abusive, the statistics for that couple getting a divorce at some point rises hugely. Because although we can sometimes rationalise and say, okay, well, that person was upset, they didn't mean what they say, I can forgive them, none of us really forget. And I'm sure that we all have situations where something is said in anger, and we can rationally recognise that person might be angry, but the wound never really goes away when something really hurtful is said. And often this is something that men complain about, that they say, she still brings up that thing that I said 10 or 15 years ago. That she still brings that up, even though I've said I'm sorry. And this is because and particularly for women, when things are said, we find that very difficult to let go, because it affects us very deeply. So like Abu Darda, we want to try and avoid getting to these situations where it becomes really ugly and turning on one another. And again, remembering that being angry is not an excuse for abusive behaviour ever. The Prophet ﷺ has said that the strong one is the one who can control their anger. So that part of developing our character is being able to not blame other people for our emotional reactions, but take responsibility for it within ourselves. Now, one of the, sometimes it gets to a point in marriages where that it's so toxic that there's such a breakdown in communication that couples just can't see eye to eye, and they're not able to work through their problems themselves. And this is what we have been given in the Quran and Sunnah, is a concept of mediation, or the concept of arbitration, of bringing someone in to be able to help a couple. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in Surah An-Nisa, verse 35, and if you fear a breach between the two, appoint an arbiter from his relatives and an arbiter from her relatives. If they both desire reconciliation, Allah will effect harmony between them. Verily, Allah has full knowledge and is well aware of everything. So this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned, that part of being able to work through issues within a marriage, and as we've said, there's no such thing as a perfect marriage, there's always going to be issues that arrive, is being willing to be humble enough to ask someone to come in and to help you work through things within the marriage, to work through conflicts. And again, sometimes when a husband and wife keep kind of butting heads, that they need someone to help them do this. Now, unfortunately, what we see a lot of times in our community is there can be a lot of resistance to this. And I know that it happens on both sides, but I hear it a lot from the women saying, I've asked my husband to come to counselling, or I've asked my husband to have someone come and talk and help us resolve, and he won't, and he shuts it down and says, we don't want to expose our issues to people, we don't want to show the problems that we're having, we'll keep it behind closed doors. And whilst Islamically, we're not supposed to go out and be gossiping about our spouses or be telling everyone our business, that's true. But at the same time, the example that we have through the Quran and Sunnah is that we're not to be hiding things away and presenting this image as if everything is perfect, when behind closed doors it's not. And so often this happens. And this is when situations don't get any better, and particularly in cases where there is any sort of abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, financial abuse. This is something that cannot be kept behind closed doors, that people need to be involved to ensure that that there's protections put in place, because these sort of things thrive in silence. So being willing to involve someone to help, it is about making sure that we're humble and being aware that, look, everyone has difficulties. Everyone goes through hard times, and that to ask someone to come and help us to work through this, if we're having a disagreement or we're struggling, is actually part of bettering our character. We have, subhanAllah, an example of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that there was once where he was having a dispute with Aisha, and they called Abu Bakr to mediate. And think, subhanAllah, what an example, mashallah, we have the Prophet ﷺ, who is the best of mankind. And he is saying, I'm the best to my wives. And yet we have the example of him having conflict with his wives. And this was not the only occasion, there were many occasions where him and his wives had difficulties between them. And again, what that's modelling to us is this is normal. This is part of a normal married life, that difficulties are going to come up, that we're not going to see eye to eye. And again, what his example was to call Abu Bakr to come in to mediate. And so when Abu Bakr came, and the Prophet ﷺ said to Aisha, do you want to speak first, or will I speak first? Like, who's going to give him the story first about what we're disagreeing about? And Aisha said, you speak, but be just in your explanation. Like we say to our husbands, you can go first, but make sure you give the full story. Don't just give your version. And when Abu Bakr heard her say this, he got really angry, because she said to the Prophet ﷺ, be just in your explanation. And he actually hit her. He slapped her across the face, and her lip split. And the Prophet ﷺ got really angry at Abu Bakr and said, this is not what we called you for. And we don't approve of we don't accept what you have just done. And what is the wisdom in giving this example? Because sometimes when people can call someone from outside saying we want someone to come and talk about our issues, what they're focused on is who's right and who's wrong, who's the winner and who's the loser. And mediation should never be about this. It shouldn't be about, let's work out who's the one who's right and who's the one who's wrong. Mediation should be about facilitating understanding between the two, and maybe providing an outside view that both of them can maybe sit back and think about, to help them to work through it. And so when we're looking at what this would look like in today's society, that it could be asking someone who's trustworthy, that you know is wise. It could be a family friend, or it could be a relative. It could be a family member that you trust their judgment, and that you know that they've got your best interest at heart, and they've got wisdom that they're going to bring to help the two of you work through those difficulties. And it's that it's not going to descend into a blame game. And it could also look like going to counselling, because sometimes professionals will actually help in that role. So although the Prophet ﷺ is not mentioning that term that we have today of a psychologist or a marriage counsellor. This is essentially what it is in practice. And that if he was willing, and if Aisha was willing, to have someone come in and mediate between them and talk to them about the issues that they're facing, then who are we as an ummah to turn around and say we're not going to allow that. We're not going to talk to people about the struggles that we're facing. So what this situation shows is that to have different perspectives where we don't see eye to eye is absolutely normal. And that's always going to be the case. We're always going to have situations with our spouses that we don't see eye to eye. And we have our own, I guess, stories or interpretation of situations that we have. And when we can understand that that we have our own story that we tell ourselves about a circumstance, and we can understand that our partners have got their own story that they tell themselves too. And when we've got the tools to have effective communication, it allows us to have ways to be able to actually open up understanding and to be able to realise the perspective that each other's coming from. And so sometimes having simple techniques to help with communication can help enormously in a marriage. And equipping ourselves with some really basic communication skills. So, and which again, if we're not raised with that, if that's not modelled to us, which a lot of people aren't, they're not necessarily raised in environments where they're taught to talk about how they're feeling, to express, their perspective. If they're not raised with that, then often we're not going to have those skills. We're not going to just be able to develop those skills. We actually it's something it's a skill that we need to learn. And so recognising in a relationship, where do we need to actually improve our skills in communication? And sometimes these skills are as basic as just really simple listening skills and not interrupting the other person, being prepared to hear them out, give them space to talk. And also being able to express our point of view without using put downs or using blame. And having times where we can sit calmly and talk about issues within a marriage is really important. So sometimes when people have arguments and it's heated and then that situation's passed, and often we continue with life and we kind of then forget about it until the next situation gets triggered and it blows up. But that it was wrong. Yet if they haven't gotten the help and support for them to be able to understand how to change that behaviour, the risk is that abuse will return and continue over time. And typically when a person doesn't get help to address their issues, especially if they've been abusing their partner, that they, simply having good intentions is not going to be enough. So what I would suggest in this particular situation, and again without knowing the details around it, that before going back to a partner where there's been a history of abuse, really make sure that what is that person doing to take responsibility to ensure that they're not going to be abusive again in a marriage, that whether they've sought treatment, they've sought counselling, therapy, and to ensure that this is something which is going to be ongoing, and also have opportunities to in place where the two of them can attend therapy together. It is really important that if a person is going back to someone who has been in the past, that there are really solid agreements set down in place, that if certain behaviours start to resurface, that immediate action will be taken, whether it's an agreement that there's going to be separation or whether they're going to call in their appointed mediators. Because again, what can happen is when a person recognises they've been abusive and they can make promises to change, but slowly those behaviours can start to creep in over time, and it's really important to ensure that you don't get yourself back into a situation where you can end up being stuck without supports. And the sisters also said this person has distanced themselves from the deen, and obviously as Muslims our iman goes up and down, that's something which happens, that there are times when we feel weaker in our iman, but in particular, it's something that we need to be careful about when we're either going into a marriage with someone who's not very practicing, or returning back to a marriage where someone's not practicing. Because when someone doesn't, if you're very grounded in your deen, and that's something which is, for you, that's the path that you're on, having to be mindful of returning to a relationship or starting with a relationship with someone it's not a priority, it can make it a really big struggle to stay strong in your own religious practice if someone is not there to support you. And whilst, sometimes we can have good intentions that we want to, help someone and encourage them in their religion and try and help them on their journey, ultimately we can't take responsibility for someone else's religious practice, that they have to want it themselves. And sometimes sisters find it extremely difficult when they themselves are trying to improve their religious practice and their connection to Allah, and they're trying to encourage their partner as well, particularly if they're struggling. And so sometimes what needs to happen is that the sister within herself thinks, what, I can only deal with one of us. I can only worry about myself for now. I can't be trying to focus on how I improve my knowledge and connection and try and pull him along as well. And ultimately knowing that it has to come from within ourselves. People can't do this for us. So if we need to be really conscious of being mindful to really have a good sense, is this someone who's going to help me in my deen, or is this someone who's going to pull me down? A similar question was asked, if I can find it, about someone who was mentioning about looking to marry someone who is not very practicing, but is saying that they want this person to help them to become practicing. Again, I would very much say to proceed with caution, because I would say if someone's not practicing but they're saying, but I want you to help me, in a way it's kind of like saying, I'm going to put the responsibility on you. And if someone's wanting to be practicing, what's stopping them from actually making those steps right now? And maybe this person is Allahu A'lam. But if they're sitting back and they're not changing their lifestyle, they're not taking those steps, I would be very, very cautious about proceeding with someone who's making promises about what they're going to be doing in future, particularly when we're talking about religious practice. Because again, if it's easy to make promises, it's easy to say, when we're together, we're going to be doing this and we're going to be doing that, and we're going to pray together and attend classes together. If they're not already doing that now and taking steps towards that now, I would be very cautious. Because it's, as we said, the grass is always greener on the other side. And sometimes we think, but it's going to be easy, we'll be able to help each other get up to pray and we'll be there to encourage each other. But as we know, that there's other challenges that come in a marriage, and there's other pressures and there's other things that pull us down. So if you haven't already entered into a marriage with someone, or again being separated, thinking about returning to a marriage, having a really, it's important to really reflect on, what is this marriage going to do to my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is this marriage going to help me, right? Is this going to help strengthen my connection to Allah? Or is there a risk that this is going to weaken and erode and test or deteriorate my connection with Allah? Because ultimately, everything in this life should lead us back to strengthening our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it's a relationship with our spouses or us as parents, or a relationship with our parents. That ultimately everything that we are doing, we should be reflecting on how does this strengthen my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because He is the one that we will return to at the end of the day. Another question, which I think is also something which is fairly common for a lot of people, particularly people who have been married for a long time. How to rekindle the love in a relationship when it goes dead, boring, and stale. And this is a very real problem, because particularly when people have been married for a certain number of years and dealing with the realities of daily life, of having to deal with the housework and the children and going to work, often the relationship takes a back seat simply because of the time pressures that are there. And sometimes there are periods that come through where that connection is not there, and the relationship does become boring and stale. And it is important that we don't look at relationships and just think, that's just what happens over time. That we
we don't want to internalize this message of a community. Oh, well, if you've been married for, 10, 20 years, what do you expect? Of course, you're not going to have that spark for one another. And we shouldn't be having this message that that's necessarily how it has to be, particularly if you're not someone who's content with that. So I would suggest, first of all, remember that doesn't necessarily have to be the reality, and it's about also looking at what the foundations are of the relationship. So some people have got quite a strong foundation. Ultimately, that love and connection is there, but it's kind of become covered up with the daily pressures and the daily grind over time. And it's about finding ways to actually reconnect to perhaps what was there at the beginning of the relationship, or what's been there at certain times. And as I mentioned earlier, really looking for opportunities to have time to spend together in ways that's going to allow the two of you to connect one-on-one. And also opening up those discussions. So we don't have enough discussions, or we're not encouraged to have discussions with our spouses on the issues of connection and intimacy. That sometimes it's just assumed that, well, it will just sort of happen, and we need to kind of get over our shyness on this topic and start to get used to creating opportunities with our spouses to say, our relationship is important to me. I don't want us to kind of just, feel like we've just become housemates, or, just parents who live with one another. I want us to have a strong connection and a really close, intimate relationship. How can we do this? How can we talk about what's important to me and what's going to help me with that, and what I would like us to work on, and what are the things that you would like to work on? So starting with it, having that conversation, and then making sure that you're putting things into practice. And of course, we're all limited in terms of what things that we can do. Whether some people have got a lot of kids and find it difficult to find time alone, or there are other barriers there. But there's always ways of creative ways to ensure that you're coming back to focusing on that connection. And sometimes it can be starting with just reconnecting the friendship between the two of you. Sometimes it can just be doing that. So having opportunities to just start to say, spending 15 minutes at the end of the day just having a chat about your day, talk about what's going on for each of you. And thinking about, when I say about getting creative, I think sometimes when we think about spending time, we're often thinking about, okay, just go out to dinner, go out for a coffee. There's no reason why we can't actually do things that are a little bit more adventurous, or things that are going to be more enjoyable. The Prophet ﷺ was racing with Aisha in when he was married to her. So things like going, if you're into hiking, or going bowling, going to an escape room, Googling different activities that you can do with your spouse, and looking at what you both, what you would find enjoyable and what he'd find enjoyable, and being willing to be a little bit adventurous, kind of breaking the mold of your day-to-day grind of what you normally do. Another question coming back to prior to marriage. So again, this is really important because I know that there are some sisters here who are not married, and some of us are at the age where we've got children and daughters who are looking to get married. So this is I said, if I make istikhara for marriage and I've got no sign or response, I don't know whether to... Can anyone hear me? Okay.
I'll just change the batteries.
Oh, that's all right. I can speak up.
Please, hang on. I've got to plug it in.
That's all right. So can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep. So if I made istikhara for marriage and I've got no sign of response, I don't know whether to go with it or not. What should I do? And this is also a very common situation when we talk about making istikhara, and sometimes, and alhamdulillah that we have the istikhara, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, that it's a blessing for us when we're faced with the difference between whether to proceed with a particular course of action or not, that we've got this tool that we can go to connect with Allah and ask Him for guidance. But sometimes, when we're talking about that there is this that we kind of can sometimes give the impression that you pray your istikhara, like you will get your answer after that. And sometimes that's not always the way it happens. Sometimes the answer from us istikhara, it can take time. And sometimes we also need, that the person actually needs time to make a decision, and that this shouldn't be rushed. And I would say for someone, if there's hesitation there in moving forward, then my advice is then not to try and push forward. Sometimes people around can be impatient and say, you've got to make a decision, you're like, khalas, you've had enough time to think about it. If there's no issues, just move forward, or if you're still not sure, then just cut it. Sometimes we actually need to remove the pressure from young people and say, you know what, it's okay to take some time and let the dust settle, and let that person kind of really reflect and think and take the pressure off. Because often with young people, when they're thinking about marriage and it's that they're considering someone, it's a big deal, and they've got all of these questions in their head and thinking about, is this person that I want to spend the rest of my life with? I don't know. I've heard horror stories from other people, but this person seems good. So they can have all of these thoughts that are running through their head, and it can be very, very overwhelming. And then if they've got added family pressure on top of that, which sometimes families don't mean to do, but in the questioning that they're asking, that person can feel pressured, like coming back, so what's your answer? I'm not pressuring you, but I just want to know what your answer is. It's like, families can put that pressure on without meaning to. And sometimes when we just say to that person, you know what, you take the time you need, we're going to take the pressure off, and you make that decision, and it's okay either way. I just want you to let it settle within you and kind of just connect with how it kind of feels in your gut. And I've seen situations where this has happened, where then with time, the person's been able to actually come to the decision to be able to say, actually, this is something that I want to move forward with, but it was just fears that were coming up, and it was panic, or realizing, you know what, I've actually realized this person is not, I don't think they're right for me, and I'm going to make that decision to trust in Allah and let it go. So removing the pressure from our young people when they're talking to someone or they've met someone is really key to reduce that confusion that they can have around that decision. So we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala, for the Maghrib prayer. Jazakallah khairan again, sisters. Appreciate your attention so much, and pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us all and guides us all to his right path. Jazakallah khairan.